You're watching Video Consultation Review for Teaching and Learning, The State of Play, produced by GP Supervision Australia and presented by Gail Wang from Avant Mutual. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which this recording was produced and pay our respects to their elders, past, present, future, and their families.
I'm really excited to be facilitating this session on a teaching method that I certainly was quite involved with as a younger medical educator, and just really over the years have seen it wither such that very few of us, I think, are now using this, I think, extraordinarily powerful educational tool in general practice training. So I'm calling it the state of play because it really is what's happening now, what's the medico-legal background to it, and maybe how we can put it back on the map. And I really would like to welcome Gail at this point. So Gail Wang is a risk advisor with Avant, one of the larger medical defence organisations. Gail started her career as a registered nurse, specialising in emergency nursing, and then she used her business skills managing her own catering company for 7 successful years. Transitioned to health and business management in a variety of disciplines, including managing day hospitals, to oncology and gastroenterology, and setting up practices from green sites. So lots of varied experience, but importantly, her role with Avant, working in this field, and a shared expertise, I think, having consulted with her colleagues about this topic, which she's very pleased to be talking to. Our learning objectives, as I alluded to, we're going to talk a little bit briefly really about the educational element of video recorded consultation review, but most importantly, the medical legal issues, particularly issues around consent, confidentiality and data protection. I'm hoping this is going to prompt a conversation between supervisors and registrars, between supervisors and their peer supervisors, between medical educators, and really think about how we might re-embrace video consultation review as a teaching and learning method. In a briefer way, we'll touch on the educational value, look at the medical legal issues, and most importantly, kind of hopefully give you some confidence and some understanding to take that away to your practices. So firstly, I want you to think as broadly as possible. And this is a fun little technique. That's a cyclone over the top end of Australia, but it's an image to represent a storm, a brainstorm, all the teaching methods you can think about. And I say this because, as we know, it is really valuable for registrars to be exposed to a whole range of different sort of methods. At inbox reviews, looking at your registrar's results, see one, do one, teach one. So, that's probably around procedural skills, scenarios, role play. Interestingly, I think role play is such a powerful tool and probably isn't used similarly to maybe video consultation review as much. Some more formal didactic teaching, random case analysis, consultation analysis, exam practice. So lots and lots and lots. And of course, this is really a way to place, and perhaps the next one, which highlights video consultation review, in amongst all this breadth of teaching methods. And I put it second there, not because it's second most important, but I think it is one of the really strong methods of consultation observation. It's as direct as it gets, observing the registrar's performance. And even more than that, so powerful because we can, stop and start and the registrar can observe what they've done. If we just look now at the educational value now, so we just thought we'd touch on this, really just to frame it, that this is such a useful method. And you can see, it does allow a breadth of skill review across broad domains like consultation, communication, clinical reasoning skills. It provides opportunities for more focused feedback. I know the MDAs are actually all about better patient care, and as we are in GP training. And that's really what this is about, of course, is that a more effective consultation, better communication skills, more sound reasoning is going to lead to a more effective and safe consultation and hopefully better patient outcomes. So that is absolutely why we're here. What are the barriers? So legal issues kill the video star. What else? Are there other barriers? I mean, there are medical legal constraints and they will be addressed. But apart from that, anything else that if you felt, well, Gail Wang from Avant told me the other night that, if I apply these particular circumstances it should be all right. What else might be a barrier to this occurring? Some more legal stuff. I guess I'm
Patient
thinking
consent.
about, registrars going, oh, no way, I don't want to see myself on video. Patients worrying, the patient consent issues. And look, it's very much, I think, part of the furniture
Okay,
still
good.
in the UK and the Netherlands and Ireland. It's somewhat easier, at least coming in, sitting in the corner, watching, giving some feedback, than fiddling with the camera, making sure you got the shot, making sure the sounds are right. So there are some technical barriers. And of course, it's the whole thing of, oh, really? You're going to film me? Look, it's bad enough being watched, but if you're going to film me, that's pretty bad. But registrars hate them until they realise how powerful they are. But you haven't come along to hear me talk about these things that are obstacles. You've come along to hear how we can facilitate this. And as I say, it's a great pleasure to hand over to Gail to talk through some of the issues and how to start to maybe implement this in your training.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Simon. I'd just like to say thank you very much for the great work that you do. I'm astounded at all the supervisors and the accountability and just what you go through to train our next group of primary care doctors. So thank you very much. So I want to talk about just what you guys are all concerned about is the medico-legal issues and the consenting. But to start with, I want you to understand what all the obligations and where the sources of these obligations come from. And I'm hoping by the end of this that you will actually see that this is just another tool you can use in your education toolkit, and you can use it or you cannot use it. It's either, but there's certainly ways that you can use it within your training portfolio. So under consent, we're looking at the Privacy Act and we're looking at the Medical Code of Conduct. They're the two that really guide us on the consent obligations that you have. And under the Privacy and Security, and we also have the Privacy Act, the new Cyber Security Act. If you don't know anything about it, you can ask Simon. I'm sure he can fill you in. Or if you're with Avant, give us a buzz and we'll let you know. And also your state legislations. And now your state legislations are in line with federal. So the federal and the state legislations do line up and they do marry. They won't go against each other. So you can always look at your state legislation as well. And that's mainly ACT, New South Wales and Victoria. And then we've got the OAIC guidelines. And I'm going to go through those a little bit more as we go through this. So let's go into the Medical Code of Conduct. Has anyone read the Medical Code of Conduct lately? I'm presuming, I'm going to take it from the doctors that I have worked with, that no. Most doctors don't read the Medical Code of Conduct, and it astounds me. We probably reference it 4 days a week. And the only one we don't reference it is when we're out speaking all day, but we still probably reference it. So it's probably 5 days a week, really. It is your Bible. It's your handbook. It's got loads of really, really, really important good things in there that you need to know. And if you do get into trouble, this is what they're going to look at and they're going to measure you by. So really get to know your code of conduct. And I would actually also recommend that you get your registrars to also read it and be familiar with it.
It is a surprisingly readable document.
It's very easy.
It is. And it's not a bad thing to have a look at. But maybe you can couch that in saying to your registrar, I was on this session and we're talking about something else, but this came up. Here it is. Let's have a look at it together. It is, because it is actually very digestible.
But encourage others to do it, because I think it's just such an important document for you to be aware of. So when we look at the Medical Code of Conduct, we look at number 4.5.2, and it talks about gaining informed consent. So we're going to talk about consent. Now, interestingly enough, if we look at the end of that informed consent, it says before involving patients in teaching or research, plus the other things. So they actually aren't saying, no, you can't involve your patients in teaching or research, but this is just part of gaining consent for your patients to be involved in teaching. So this is the Medical Code of Conduct talks to it, and we go, great, it means that we can do it. We will look at the other issues we will look at around that and how they all join and marry up together. So that's your Medical Code of Conduct, but please read it. It's great for your medical records. It's great for your recalls. It's got everything in there. So please read it. Then we're going to look at the OAIC, which is the Office of Information of Australia Commissioner. So we're looking at the Australian Privacy Principles. Who knows and has read and is familiar with the Australian Privacy Principles? Nope. Because we kind of go, that isn't for us, right? Yeah, no one cares because it just sounds too big and onerous. But again, it's got some brilliant information on your medico-legal obligations under there. Who are the Australian privacy principles? Who has to apply by them? Anyone who bills over $3 million, or if you're a healthcare provider. So you're all in it. You all have to abide by it. Australian privacy principles is your other key aspect. There's 13 of them. We're going to talk to the ones that are relevant. So the first one, APP1, you must have a privacy policy. Now, I know that you're all going to be working in practices that are accredited, so we know they've all got privacy policies. However, there has been some changes to the privacy legislation and to the Australian privacy principles as well. So there is some updates you need to make. If you're unsure of that, it's mainly around AI, but if you are unsure, contact your MDO and they can help you out. The ROCGP has also got an excellent new template they've put out, so you can always go there. So that's the first thing, a privacy principle has to cover everything. So we'll talk about how that involves the medico-legal aspect a little bit later. APP 3.2. And again, this is another really quite easily readable document. There's only 13 of these. So it talks about you can collect information that's reasonably necessary to perform your function. So you can collect personal and sensitive information if it's reasonably necessary to perform your function. So in this aspect, we're looking at the function is training. Now, I've asked all our lawyers and they've all said it is reasonable to think that this could be, and it's reasonably necessary to help with the assistance of training your registrars. So we've got to remember that this is all about the only thing we're talking about here is for training purposes only, and that's it. So we're looking at, yes, we've got to have a privacy policy and you can collect it because it would be deemed reasonably necessary to do the training with your registrars. So you can only collect the information where the conditions are met and the individual consents. So again, we've got the consent now in a medical code of conduct and we've got what you need to do and we've got now consent here. So we're going to gain consent to collect the personal and sensitive information. So then we've got APP 6 talks about when you can disclose the personal information for the purpose it was collected. Now, this is a really important key medico-legal thing for you to think about. It's the purpose that you're collecting it for. And I'm going to probably say this, and if you don't go away with anything else, it's just for the purpose you collect it. We are consenting for the sole, only, and primary purpose for training. We are not collecting the information in this regard for delivery of healthcare. We're only collecting it for training, and that's it. If you want to collect it for anything else, it's a different kettle of fish.
And I think just to elaborate on that, Gail, that's almost the opposite to, I think, what I thought and maybe what lots of people have seen as a barrier, that this is actually a very explicit reason we are collecting this exclusively for training, and it just by default becomes part of the medical record because we are not collecting this for the clinical care of the patient. So as you'll talk about, it can be used only for that purpose and it can therefore be destroyed once that purpose has been met. I think it's almost a kind of a counterpoint to this thing of, but if we collect it for training, it just happens to be part of the medical record and we're kind of stuck. And that, I think, is the nub of this whole issue that people have felt so uncomfortable about.
And that's where I think people think that because you're videoing it in a healthcare setting, it therefore becomes part of it. But your purpose for collecting it is for training.
In Victoria in 2012, the Healthcare Commissioner decided that according to the Medical Records Act, the videoed consultation formed part of the medical record, even if it was for training purposes. And this meant that it needed to be stored for 7 years, and that's where the death of the video consultation review occurred.
Yeah, and I guess that's where I've spoken to our top lawyers about this, and they've gone, this is very clear under these circumstances. So it is being collected, again, for the purposes for training only. It is not being used to make clinical decisions, to deliver healthcare, to go, actually, you know what, I need to get that person back and go and put this we need to go and do further examinations. It's not to deliver care. It's purely and solely for training and review of the training purposes. Once you start delivering healthcare as a result of this, it is different. So again, collecting it and consenting for training purposes only. And in this landscape, there are other specialties that certainly do videoing and they follow these rules, then they use it for training purposes only. So I think we just need to get our heads around the purpose of the collection, get the consent right, and make sure we destroy it right at the end of it and how long we keep it for. So I think that back in 2012, it may have changed, and I know someone's brought that out, but our legal team have said that's not what they would see it as. And if you're with Avant, we would just say, we're more than happy for you to go, and I'll explain that a little bit later, to use it for the purposes. We're not trying to look for ways to discourage doctors to become better doctors. We want to support and help you in that process. And if by any chance any of this, our lawyers thought you can't do it, we would have pulled the plug on it straight away and said you can't do it. But there was not one word that was said by any of our legal team to say no. And this is the reasons why.
Thanks, Gail. And I guess that's, as I was trying to say at the beginning, hopefully this will be a conversation starter. Hopefully this will prompt us to say, well, you know, I'm not comfortable despite what was said, so that's not for me, versus, you know, I think this is really powerful. I'd like to pursue this. I feel comfortable enough, or indeed, Gail, whether MDOs can provide some support to a practice to say, yes, we will back you up to undertake this type of activity. So I'm really pleased as this sort of dialogue, because this isn't just go ahead and do it without any concerns.
Yeah, it's certainly doable, but there's certainly, it's like using AI in your practice. It's doable, but there are certain legislation you need to adhere to. And this is exactly the same. I'll go on to consent in a little bit. I'm going to talk to you quite a bit about consent. Let me just go through briefly about the last one on the APPs. I want to talk about, it's number 11. It's talking about when we no longer need the information. Now, this is all information that we record. So remember, this holds for any business outside health that earns more than $3 million. So when it's no longer needed for the purpose for which it was collected. So the purpose for this, again, was for teaching purposes only. So if we go back, once the purpose has been fulfilled and the training has been done, it must be deleted. So no longer needs the information. So that's a really important thing to understand, that you don't keep it forever. It's got to be destroyed as soon as it's no longer needed for that one purpose, the training purpose that it was collected for. That's it, end of story. And this is what the APPs 11 is talking about. It also talks about your 7 years, and I'll just diverge a little bit because I'll give you a bit of context. Doctors always say, I keep my medical records forever. However, the Privacy Commissioner, if you have a cyber breach, which happens quite frequently, a lot more frequently than we like to admit, and that information is then breached and then it's stolen or you've been ransomed or whatever, they will come to you and go, why are you still holding this information that is no longer needed for the purpose for which you collected it? So just think about that. It's across the board. But for this purposes, we're looking at not keeping it for very long. Okay, so just remember that. I won't go into the last bit there, but then we just say need to take reasonable steps to destroy the information. And I'll go through that a little bit further down the track. Who owns the video? The person who took the video. That's a good question, though. So just for the APP on consent, so the Australian privacy principles also talk about consent. So this is your consent process that you would train and teach your registrars and what they need to look for. So it's going to be an overview of it, but it always comes down to informed consent and being open and transparent with your patients. So they need to give the informed consent beforehand. They need to give it voluntarily. And I'll talk about this and I'll reiterate this a bit later. They can't do it when they feel coerced or under pressure, or they're going to get a better service, or they're going to get a cheaper treatment, or they can't be doing it for any other purpose, just to say, yeah, sure, I don't mind you doing it. They mustn't feel coerced into giving their consent. It must be current and specific. So what does that mean? Obviously current every single time they want to do it. You can't just do one up front and every week they come in, you just keep videoing it. It's got to be current and specific. Just because you're taking a mole off someone and you're going, come back next week, you don't use the same consent form for the 2 different procedures. You've got to get consent. It's got to be current and specific. And the individual has to have capacity. So again, that's nothing new to any of you, but it still applies to gaining consent here. And interestingly enough, the APPs, which none of you have read, talk about this. So you can go and look at your APPs. So again, we're just going to go into consent a little bit more. We need our informed consent, which we just talked about. We need it to be written down. We need to have a consent form written down. So the patient then needs to sign it, and then you countersign it. The doctor countersigns it. Then I would say we always suggest and we always advise to offer the patient a copy. I don't know if any of you do offer your patient a copy of consent. If you're a non-procedural, you're probably only doing mine. You probably don't do many consents in that regard. The reason why we say that is we find that if a patient is given the consent form, they don't take and remember everything that happened in that consultation. So in this regard, they could go home and say to their wife or to their spouse or to their children, oh no, the doctor videoed it today. It was really cool, blah, 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 blah. But what they video it for? Oh, I can't remember. But they just, well, hang on. What do they video it for? But they can say, oh, look here, here's the consent form, and they can refresh it and remind themselves on what they consented for. And their family may say, actually, we don't like that. We don't think that's a good idea. Pull out, tell them to get rid of it and don't do it again. What we find is that a lot of complaints come from not just the patient, but they do come from family members. So that helps the family know what's going on as well. And then we say document it. Document it where? In the medical records. We love the medical records, keep them contemporaneous and up to date. And so document the medical records. So what do we document? We document that the consent was given. You got the consent form there. We need to know who was in the room, just so we've got a really nice little blurb on that. And we also need to have our policies updated. So this is something that you probably all agree that's not something you like doing, is the policies. But if you own a practice, you're director of a practice, then the policies and the governance is all about you. So you need to have policies. We need to update your privacy policy to say that, yes, you are using video consultations may be used, and this under this, why we're going to collect it, who's going to access it, how we're going to store it, and when we're going to destroy it. So that's the policies that we're looking at. And there's also some new cybersecurity stuff coming out as well. So I'm going to recap here on the consent requirements. So we need to put in the consent, what the purpose of the recording is, and who will have access to it. Now I've added here that it's not available to the patient, and this should form part of your consenting process to let them know that you will not be sharing this with the patient. I would, if I was in your shoes and someone was really, oh, but I really think I want a copy of it, I probably would give it a miss. You don't want the patient to be hounding you for a copy of that consultation. So we do get patients that put in complaints to the HCCC in New South Wales or to the medical board about some very weird accessing that they want of information that they're not available to. So in this regard, because it's not healthcare, it's for training purposes only, make it really clear. So the recording, again, for educational purposes. And in the consent, we go, and this is consent and your privacy policy. It will only be shown to professional staff to use in support and learning and the assessment. So be very clear and transparent. All the new privacy in cyber is all about transparency with our patients. How you're going to store the recording, how long you're going to keep it for, when it will be destroyed. Then we need to look at whether or not the patient gives consent and it will not affect their medical care or treatment. And if you decide to give a discount, I would advise against it, because that could be called coercing your patient to give it, and they can withdraw their consent at any time. So you might get a phone call later that day to say, hey, look, we don't want you to use it anymore. Can you destroy it? Absolutely, anytime. As the recordings for training purposes only, again, my little line this time, for training purposes only, be deleted, not form part of the medical records, but the consent must be recorded in the medical records, including everyone's present. So it's pretty concise about what your consent must contain.
Our supervisors are a great group, Gail, and so obviously nobody's sitting here just passively taking this in. There's lots of kind of, well, how's this going to work, and is this too much for one practice to take on? And I think absolutely and this whole notion of advocacy with the colleges leading the way. And I think that this is exactly the conversation I'm kind of hoping this will lead to.
Yeah.
And I think what's really interesting is that video consultation review features, I don't know about prominently, but certainly is mentioned in a number of RSCGP and very recently produced documentation. I know that as a medical educator. So, it's there, particularly in the aspect of remediation and, the struggling registrar. So absolutely, if this thing's being promoted as a powerful tool, if there are mechanisms to make it work, but it all feels a bit kind of, threatening at the practice level, we need our colleges, I think, to facilitate that if there's enthusiasm from the supervisor cohort to use it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what your colleges are there for, is to help support you to do these things. And I think if you guys all get together and go, look, actually, we really want to start looking at this and how we can put it together. And the RSCGP are actually very good at pulling out templates and guides on how to do things. So we've just thrown this together. This is just a template to give you an idea of a consent form. Again, it's just an idea that you can use and store it in your medical records. They can scan it and put it in there. So we do have this template. So it talks about what they're consenting for the purposes outlined below, the purpose of the recording, blah, 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 how it's going to be stored, and the destruction of it, and the signing and the dating. Just remember, a consent form does have to have 3 points of ID. So make sure you've got 3 points of ID there for the patient. Now, I haven't done that here. I've just got I, the patient. So you will need to add extra additional identifiers in that. This is just to give you an idea of a consent form for that purpose. So again, because I love the word consent, it's a key driver in this. So consent, we're just going to recap on this. We're talking about, it's the Privacy Act, which is the APPs. We're talking about then your cyber safety. We're talking about gaining consent. We're talking about how we store it and how we delete it. I'm going to go into the storage of deleting and the devices that you use in a moment. But cyber safety is your big other key issue here and the key driver, because you have to keep the information, the patient's information, safe and secure. Possibly, if you're going to start going down this path and have a go, and this is open for further discussions, what device do you use? So whatever device you use, whether it's your personal or it's a work one, it needs to be cyber safe. So generally a practice camera, if it does have the video, it won't have all the extra additional platforms on there that can create a breach that goes in there. But I'll talk about that more in a minute. So consenting process, we just need to make sure these are your key drivers that you've got to adhere to. Gain consent, we store and delete it, and we use it for the primary purpose, the sole, single purpose only, for training. Again, if you're going to use it for anything else, please contact your MDO so we can walk you through that. I don't know how many of you are with Avant, but this is our view on using medical records. Now, DIT stands for Doctor in Training. So we take the view that Doctor in Training recordings could be deleted where the sole purpose, the only purpose, the primary purpose for the creation was for the Doctor in Training feedback and education, not clinical care. And therefore, the information does not amount to health information and does not need to be included into the medical records. So that's pretty clear on Avant's stance of using video recordings. Obviously, knowing that you've got all these other, make sure you consent, you store, you do all that kind of stuff as well. And also that we suggest when obtaining consent for the patient's consults to be recorded for, again, the sole purpose, the only purpose, patients are informed of the purpose for training. So again, we're talking about the consenting process. So that's our take, Avant Mutual's take on using video recordings for consultation for training purposes. We don't have a problem with it so long as you consent and you record it and you store it appropriately. I hope that makes sense for everybody. So this is something that I just want you to think about. I'm not going to go into it a big deal, but this is your cybersecurity. So if you're going to take it, someone's saying that if you're thinking about it, you're probably going to use your personal device, set it up in the corner. I'm an iPhone girl, so I don't know anything about Androids, but you can Google it. But again, it's making sure your iPhone's safe and secure. One thing you do have to remember is that all those other apps on your phone create a cyber risk. So you need to lock down the videos that you're going to take on your phone. You can lock down messages on your phone. You can lock down videos on your phone. There's really good links on the web on how to do that. And I would suggest that that would be part of your policy on how to do this. And your SOPs is just how do we lock it down? Make sure it's safe and secure. You can also lock it down on yourself and send it through WhatsApp lockdown. This has always been the case as far as I'm aware from Avant. So I've talked to my lawyers. We've talked to this multiple times and in depth because Simon kept coming back to me. And so we kept having multiple conversations. So, and I've had this all approved by our lawyers as well in delivering this message. So they're all very aware of it and they have no issues with doing videoing for training purposes only.
And so if you're reviewing the video and the registrar thinks, oh my goodness, or indeed you say, did you think of this particular diagnosis? And you come up with, well, perhaps we need to do this particular test. And it changes, the registrar thinks, well, I better get them back or I'll need to, phone them up or add a different test. Does that move beyond the purpose of teaching, which is interesting?
It's a very good question. And I guess it's a question that I would, if it does come up, I would just say if it's used for clinical viewing and change the clinical and the outcome for the patient, then you're not using it for the sole purposes of training. So the sole purpose of training is to train the registrar, not to have a change in a clinical direction of that patient.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting nuance because I don't know that I'd considered that, but whether that is, there's always that potential risk or maybe that's not uncommon.
I guess what would happen though, is if you weren't using video and you were talking to your registrar and you said, hey, what have you thought about this? Does that conversation, do you record that in the medical records? Does that become part of the medical records, that conversation that you've had? Or does the registrar then act on that? I can guarantee you don't record it in the medical records.
And in fact, we've got a cohort of supervisors who you just put that to, and I'd be very curious to know if you have a case discussion on a Thursday afternoon about a bunch of patients and you say, you know what, maybe this is what might be a good approach. Yeah, is that documented somewhere? And I suspect it's not, as you say, commonly.
Yeah. And I guess we're looking at, you want to sort of go, that was really good, or next time, look at this aspect of patient care and make sure you don't forget to add this or check this or check left and right arms for blood pressure, whatever it happens to be. But it's got to be used for the sole purpose of training. So then we're talking about, I'm just going to quickly wind up very quickly here. We're talking about the new Cybersecurity Act and if it's stored in your practice software. So depends on what device you're going to be using, depending on what kind of software, but lock down the video and delete it as much as possible, as quickly as possible, as soon as it's not required for that sole purpose of which it was collected. So the Cybersecurity Act has changed and the privacy and the APPs have also changed. So if you've got an Avant practice policy, please reach out. We're more than happy to talk to your practice managers about the new changes and the requirements. And if you're a director, you're on the firing line for that. So please make sure that you're aware of all that. And so that some of that comes into this. But again, it's just store it properly. So then we're looking at the checklist that I want you to think about is we need to have open and transparent communication. So this is what the Privacy Commission and the OAIC and everyone's talking about is open and transparency. So make sure you got the privacy policy. It's including your privacy policy. We gain written consent prior. We do not delegate. So don't get the girls at the front desk to go, hey, and hand you the consent form saying, yep, they consented. No, can't delegate. And who should take it? A registrar should get the consent because that's a good training for them. Train and advise the staff at the front desk. You may decide that if you want to try it, is that the patients who you deem might be suitable, get a little handout to say, hey, this is what the doctor's doing. Let them know if you're interested in doing it. Little blurb on that to hand out while they're waiting in the waiting room. We make sure we retain it for the purposes and then we destroy it as soon as it's not required any longer. We need to look at the cyber safety and the personal devices are set to secure mode. So that's my top little checklist there. My one thing I'm going to say again is the purpose for the video recorder of the consultation is for educational purposes only. That's it. That's what this is all about. We're talking about educating your registrars.
So are there any success rates for getting consents are much worse if the conversation is started by a receptionist?
I would not get the consent question, but what you could do is they could say, look, doctors, they're videoing, but not talk about the consenting process. So I wouldn't know because I don't know anyone doing it at the moment. But I know that when we started with AI, and we're looking like a year ago when people were starting AI scribes, and they were getting the receptionist to start that conversation going before they got into the waiting room, but we don't need to do that now. So whether it's a high success rate, couldn't tell you. It's just another thing to give to the admin staff who are super busy. So keeping that in mind as well, that they don't want something else loaded onto their plate when the consenting process is for the registrar who's going to be using that.
Maybe having a non-internet connected device to do it. It's obviously nice and easy to start the video on your iPhone, but if it's going to go straight to the cloud, there's a potential concern there.
Yeah.
And maybe, removing its access to the internet, or indeed using a more standard camera that has a video capacity is the way to go. And again, it's interesting because you might be thinking, oh gosh, I asked about barriers earlier and there seem to be lots of barriers. And there are true medical legal barriers and some challenges here, but they are able to be overcome. And I think, it'd be good to see if we can, as a group, as a collective really, try to overcome some of these. Because I think it is a real shame that we're not able to do this as freely as we might. So what about destruction of the video, Gail? I mean, is that as simple? I guess if we know it's not off in the cloud, then it is a question of just deleting it.
Look, it is a question of deleting it. And this is where you're going to have to look at the risk mitigation, your cyber and your privacy obligations. Not having something connected to the cloud is not even to the internet is obviously ideal, but not everyone's going to be able to do that. So you need to look at the ways that you can lock down your phones. You can lock down videos in your phone so they're not going to then accidentally be leaked onto some other apps on your phone like Facebook, because how often does something on your phone turn up in your photos? You go, oh, I didn't take that. Where'd that come from? And it's also a source of a threat actor coming in and breaching your phone. So yeah, could you just use a burner phone? You could use whatever you want, but you need to just make sure that you're safe and that you've taken all reasonable steps. So the Privacy Act doesn't say that you're never going to get an intrusion. It says you need to take all reasonable steps. So if you're going to take it on your phone, the reasonable steps would be to lock it down. So it's not saying that you can never, that we know that you're not ever going to get hacked, because at some point in time, there's going to be some kind of intrusion into your systems.
Yeah, I'm not confident starting to do this unless the college came up with a directive. I'm really hoping that, I have another conversation with them and maybe similarly others can.
Yeah.
And it couldn't be any worse than it is now, but if we can get some momentum, that might be really valuable.
We just think it's a really important tool for you to use in your teaching to eventually, like we said at the beginning, to deliver better patient outcomes. But, keep in contact with us. But yeah, I know our legal team are more than happy for it to be used so long as we get consent and we're cyber safe and we have our policies all updated. And really, you've done it all using AI scribes. You've done all the same things. It's now just adding an extra layer about using video for training purposes only. So that's what the event take would be.
We were going to do a little consent exercise, Gail. We're, as you probably know, a training practice here. So we have medical students and we have pre-vocational doctors, people who are working in the hospital, and we have GP registrars who are in training. And we have adopted a new approach here, having been advised about its use in GP training, where we record the consultation with your consent for use to show the registrar how they went during the consultation. So the way it works is, as the doctor, we will set up the camera and we would record the consultation, so you don't have to do anything differently, that this doesn't impact at all on the way we care for you. And the only reason that we are making this recording is that my supervisor can use it to help me learn about general practice.
Well, are you not very good?
I'm in training, so...
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I would have hoped the receptionist told you at the front desk.
Oh,
I'm a
no,
doctor. I think a lot of people don't appreciate that. But
Okay.
yeah, no, I'm just in training. So I need, hopefully, your consent. I have a written consent form here, and we can go through it. But it talks about recording the video only for my teaching purposes. It talks about how we dispose the video immediately after we use the recording for training. And it certainly talks about your consent being voluntary and that you can withdraw that at any stage.
And can I get a copy?
No, you can't
Oh.
have a copy,
Oh.
but that's because it is, as I say, the only reason is not for a record of the consultation. It's just for training purposes. So it doesn't change anything.
Will you bulk bill me on the way out then?
I'll just have to check. I don't normally bulk bill you, I think, so I'll probably have to use my standard billing approach.
All right. I
We
guess so.
better wrap up. That wasn't an Academy Award-winning performance, I know, and interesting because, I think having a template, having a bit of structure, having a bit of guidance is important. So I was certainly winging it there.
And like you've kind of got a bit of an understanding of your next steps. Let's get the ROCGP involved. Let's have a look to see how we can do this properly. Because I understand you probably still a little bit reluctant. Yep.
Yeah, I think if you feel that this is something you've used before or that it's got some advantage and you're having a yarn to the college, yeah, I guess we can continue this conversation, I think would be great. Nothing like having a real person with real reactions and real responses and seeing how the registrar responds.
I think that's a really good way just to even start seeing how your script goes, how you do it, and get people used to doing it even when they're med students to go, look, this is a tool that we're going to use later on as you go through your training. But yeah, it can be quite useful before you actually start it on real people.
I've enjoyed this conversation, Gail. Thank you very much. This has really kind of, I think, been a bit of a challenge and it's been a bit provocative. And I think that's great and important that we do this sort of thing. Hopefully, it will allow you to think about incorporating this into your teaching repertoire a bit more. I think it is incumbent on us to take this to the colleges and to say, where do you think we sit with this? And Gail, I'd just really very much like to thank you for your time in preparation. And I think behind the scenes, obviously, talking to your colleagues, getting that legal opinion, presenting it so clearly, looking at the legislation and the appropriate sort of policy, because that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, it's just adhering to legislation.
Yep.
It's totally doable. But yeah, look, good luck with this. I'd love to be able to keep up and see where you end up with it and talking with the ROCGP and your colleges and stuff.
Yeah, thank you very much,
Absolutely.
everyone. And look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. We'd love your feedback. Please comment or subscribe to our YouTube channel for updates on new videos. If you'd like to ask a question or suggest a topic, you can contact us via our website at gpsa.org.au. GP Supervision Australia is supported by funding from the Australian Government under the Australian General Practice Training Program.